The Wiggly Podcast. The Archers, but real.
Hello listener, welcome to Wiggly Podcast, and what a lucky guy I am today. I'm joined by Rachel.
Hello Rich.
Hello Rach. Farmer Phil.
Hello.
And last but by no means least, young Alison.
Hello.
Hiya. It's great to see you guys, and we've got some really interesting things to talk about today.
We have, Rich. We've got some goodies on the table.
Yeah, we have. And Phil, I've noticed some interesting goings on in the house. There's it appears that there's a bit of money being spent on the house. A subsidy's particularly good this year.
Well, no.
Has the public purse been particularly kind to you?
Subsidies are declining, but the price of wheat is going up. But no, it's really that age-old thing that because this house is rented, but in an ideal world we expect to live in it for a considerable length of time to come.
Yeah.
You know, normally one would consider doing up one's own property and enhancing its value by doing that. Well, we don't have that option.
No.
So at some point, and it's sort of fairly long gaps between it, we decide that we have to sort of brighten the place up a bit.
Yeah.
And we've got ADA on full building action. He's repaired the hole in the ceiling where the water tank leaked.
That, and the ceiling is no longer hanging ominously above the hallway as you walk in.
We've harvested the mushrooms that were growing out of it. And so, yes, we're putting one or two things to rights. A lick of paint, that should keep it somewhere near for the next 20 years. Don't aim to use too much paint, you know.
No, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't go.
What I thought was quite interesting was that Heather goes out of the door on her Nuffield trip to America and says, right, that this, that and the other is going to happen, and we're going to paint this, that and the other, and the rest of us are left living in a building site while she's swanning around the hotels of Western California.
There's no flies on Hev. She's a very shrewd operator. I've come to realise this. And you, more than most, should know that by now, Phil. So what else have you been up to anyway? I mean, it's a beautiful day out there. You know, we've got a fantastic sunny autumnal day.
It is a glorious day. We've just had a spell of extremely frustrating weather. It must be the best part of a week where we've had this sort of persistent drizzle and cloudy, murky, damp, dank, horrible conditions, and we're planting at the moment, and obviously that is a complete nightmare because the soil gets wet and it won't dry.
Okay.
But having said that, we're getting on all right. The ground is very, what we call tight.
Right.
The heavy rain earlier on in the year, compacted is the wrong word. It's bashed it down, and it's proving very hard to work. We're using a lot of metal and a lot of diesel.
Right.
To get it freed up, and we're suffering, well, we're broken down as we speak.
Yeah.
We're getting quite a lot of metal fatigue in some of the equipment because of the considerable forces involved.
Okay.
But
so the best time spent welding and whatnot.
Yes, it's just a consequence of the sort of rather unusual weather patterns this year.
Yeah.
But it'll come right, and I mean, actually having worked the ground, it's in good nick, and this is where having a decent soil structure really pays, because although the weather has banged it down, it comes up and it breaks. You'll see the fields where the soil structure is not so good, and it's ploughing up in tombstone-sized lumps, which are an absolute nightmare. Ours is nice and broken, nice tilth, and that's by virtue of how we've treated it for the last 10 years. You know, you can see the fields that have been abused. You can see the little areas in ours. At some of the places where we took the combine when the soil was wet, you can see the combine marks up the field, the compaction there, and that'll take 12 months to sort itself out.
Right.
So we've got that, and we've got the joys of blue tongue and continued foot and mouth action, thanks to DEFRA. That's quite an accurate, because there's not a lot we can do about blue tongue as farmers, because it's spread by midges, which are obviously a disease agent in a similar way that mosquitoes spread malaria.
Sure. Presumably it's a completely fatal disease, blue tongue.
About 70% of sheep that catch it will die. They die a particularly nasty death. Their tongue swells and all their head swells up.
Oh, nice.
And they get to the point that they can't eat. And they get all mucus and phlegm and rubbish. And if you leave them, they either starve to death or just die through being miserable.
Right.
Cattle, the figure is reputed to be less 20 to 30% will suffer that
Is it
problem.
treatable?
Not really. You can alleviate the symptoms, but apparently you can't treat the disease. But having said that, a cow that's had blue tongue and survives then can't get it again. There is an immunity system that works.
Right.
But it's one of a number of what we would probably in the past have called tropical diseases. Another one that people are starting to get quite worried about is African horse sickness,
Right.
which is another absolutely appalling disease if you're a horse. They die a most horrific death.
Yeah.
But they're diseases that these warm spells, that they will come to us from the warmer areas of the planet, and blue tongue is an example of that. The theory is that if we have a good hard winter, that will knock the midges out,
Right.
and so that will fix it.
Right.
One of the ironies of the situation is that you can vaccinate against blue tongue, but we've got no vaccine because the lab that produces the vaccine was the lab that Foot and Mouth escaped from at Pirbright, and they've shut it down. So they're not developing
God.
any blue tongue vaccine because they shut the lab down because
great.
Foot and Mouth got out of it. So
Fabulous.
it really demonstrates to me that our lines of defence, and this is what I actually think DEFRA, this is their job, is to sort out things like disease protection for the country and so on. This is their real remit, rather than hassling the rest of us over whether our margin is 2 metres or 2.5 metres a metre. They should be sorting this out, and they haven't. It comes down to one lab, which is not biosecure, that they've had to shut down, and now we're knackered. And I just think demonstrates that we're pretty exposed. And
Yeah,
whether you get
absolutely.
onto the subject of global warming and all the rest of it, that's a different thing.
Right.
DEFRA are not very well prepared for this, I don't think.
No, I don't suppose they are for 1 minute. But anyway, on a more upbeat note, of course, this is the time of year. I mean, a time of year of plenty, really, Rach, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, Rich. We've
And
been doing some great stuff, haven't
We've
we?
had some great conversation in the office recently about who's making what and who's eating what and stuff like that, because it's so fulfilling to be able to go along the hedgerows and pick lots and lots of food.
Well, and it's great. Have you noticed how this is the time of year how people give each other things? So that,
Yes.
I've got a friend who I supply with a bit of wheat for his chickens and some straw, and he comes and collects that, and he gives me a bottle of beer that he brews homebrew beer.
Oh, wow.
He gives me a barrow load of damsons because he's got a huge, and tomatoes we've had loads of. And everybody sort of says, I've got loads of apples, would you like some apples? And it's great, there's all these bits of produce going around the
It is fabulous. It's a
neighbourhood.
great way to behave, actually, because it's so, in many respects, it's so much more rewarding to be given something that has meaning rather than just a few quid, So it's great fun.
Well, I suppose the time's gone by. This is the time when you stock up the larder and everything for winter, isn't it? Make all your preserves, your jams, your drinks and things, and store it for
Absolutely.
winter. And
Absolutely.
your apples, they were normally stored in trays, weren't they, for winter? Or
Yeah.
people still do.
I can remember putting apples out in the loft on newspaper so that they'd store through the winter time in the dark.
Yeah.
We used to pick all the apples and do that, lay them out.
Yeah, and squashes and all those kind of things. I mean, onions are now hanging up, as are the garlic, all nice and dry and ready to be picked right through the year. And of course, I mean, pickling, I guess, and preserving are two of the main ways that we have a tasty treat right through the winter time.
Yeah, earlier on I just mentioned the goodies on the table. So on the table we have a selection of goodies, haven't we,
Are you
Rich?
going to be mum,
Yay.
right? Are you going to be mum?
So we've got homemade blackberry jam, plum jam and damson jam. But as this is one of my first efforts at it, it is of various states of runny to thick.
That's a very good point, because having watched my mother make jam, she always said that there's this product called Certo, isn't there, that you can put setting agents in jam to make them set.
Yeah.
But one, it's very expensive,
Yeah.
and two, it doesn't add anything to the taste of it. The setting or not of it is down to the sugar,
Yeah,
isn't it?
that is an interesting point, because I actually made one batch and it was so runny that you poured it out, and so then I bought some Certo and put it in, and it was still runny and you poured it out.
Right.
But since then I've talked to a more experienced cook than myself, and they say you should buy preserving sugar, because that has got everything in it that you need to set the jam. And so that's what I went out and did for the damson jam. But not realising that the pectin level in damson jam is already there. So you don't need preserving jam for that. So that is now solid in the jar. But I'm living and learning for next season.
Okay.
But the real point is that the taste of it has no bearing. If it's runny, all right, it's difficult to keep it on your toast.
Yeah.
Who cares? You just have a bit
It's a
more
psychological thing,
I mean,
isn't it,
when my husband opens up the pot and he pours it out on the bread, I said to him, "Oh, please, just put the knife in it once, just for me." But he says,
you know
"What for?"
The way round it, Rach, as they probably did in days of old, is that you should have a spoon in it, and that overcomes the problem.
That's true.
So you don't need to worry then.
I have got a very nice little jam spoon that I
That's
picked
the
up at a
way to
car
do it.
boot sale, and I shall tell him to use that.
Right, Rach, get slicing.
Righto. But we've
Get
also got
slicing.
drink
And
too, haven't
Al, what have you brought us?
Well, I brought in sloe gin.
Possibly the best bit of today.
Yeah. I was going to bring in damson gin as well, but I went to the cupboard and it's gone.
No.
Someone's beaten me to it.
Yeah. But this is last year's stock as well, isn't it?
Yeah, this is last year's. We've got this year's ongoing at the moment. So it's just got the sloes in the jar.
How easy is it to make sloe gin?
Very
Al?
easy.
What's your recipe, Al?
Well, you just collect the sloes. You always wait for a frost and then go and collect the sloes. There's absolutely loads this year. Have you seen loads?
They are loaded. The trees are loaded. Why do you have to wait for a frost?
Well, if you don't wait for a frost, you can pick them and freeze them. They always say they have to have a frost on them.
Okay.
It's like eating Swedes, I suppose.
Does that mean you don't have to prick them?
Yeah, you'd have to prick each one.
Do you want my handy hint to prick your sloes?
Well, I put them in the freezer and then take them back out a couple of days later, and then you don't have to prick them.
You don't have to prick them. Well,
No.
my handy hint is to use an old-fashioned cheese grater.
Right.
And put the sloes on a kitchen surface and get the cheese grater on top and roll them around with it.
Tell you what, that's the first piece of useful information Phil has ever told me.
So go on, Al. What ratios do you use of sloes to booze to sugar?
I just do it off pat, really. There are certain recipes, but I usually put about 3 inches of sloes in the bottom of a large jar with a wide opening and fill it up with gin. Any cheap gin will do. And then in a couple of the sloes, I put a couple of the cloves that you can buy to give it a bit of a twang.
Yeah.
And then you add, I start by adding 2 ounces of sugar and then slowly build it up. Some people like it more syrupy, so I do it by taste, really, not on any specific recipe, because sometimes it can be too sweet.
Yes, yeah.
And that's quite sweet, that one there.
So what are we going to try first, guys? Are we going to do the jam thing first? Or would it be a shame to kind of abuse our taste buds with bread before we slurp on some alcohol?
I'm going to take Michael one over. There you go, Michael.
I made some slow whiskey. So instead of using gin, just use scotch.
Oh, that'd be quite nice.
And as Al says, if you use a lot of sugar, it gets very, very sweet.
Right.
And so the recipe that I'd sort of been told for slow gin was to use roughly equal volumes of sloes, sugar and gin.
Right.
So that if you have a pint of sloes, a pint of sugar and a pint of gin, put it all together. But that is obviously very sweet. Yeah, and when the slow whiskey came out, it was really syrupy.
Right.
But then I discovered that if you add scotch back to it to taste, you can dry it up if you like. Absolutely fantastic.
So it's a little mixer.
I mean,
in its own right.
You've got to like whiskey, and if you don't like whiskey, it's fairly pointless.
Yeah.
But it's in the same realms as a whiskey mac, which is another drink which is just fabulous in a hip flask.
Yeah, fantastic.
And I really like that. And another little tip for you.
This is great. So you're going to be sharing this with us around Christmas time then? I've never managed to. I remember when I went shooting with you that time, you didn't offer me a hip flask at all.
Well, my hip flask has got a slight problem at the moment, in as much that its stopper leaks, and so I've got a repair job to do on it.
Okay.
So it's nothing worse than a leaking hip flask.
No, that's right.
This slow gin's good for skiing in a hip flask.
Yeah, I bet it is.
Mountain, really warms
you.
you
Look at that black slope.
The slow gin is good for the fact that you're on a cold, snowy mountain. As regards good for skiing, not a hope. It's useless for skiing.
Builds your confidence up.
Anyway, cheers.
Okay, cheers.
Everyone.
Yeah, let's have a little taste.
It's delicious.
No, that is good stuff.
Good
That is.
stuff.
That's very good.
You can add more sugar.
No, that's very good because it's not
That
too
is
sweet.
excellent.
I think
Sometimes
you've got it right
swirl
there.
it around
Al.
the glass, it actually sticks to the side of the glass
Yeah.
if you added too much sugar.
I'm
No,
not
it's
a
a
gin
sign of a
fan,
good liqueur,
but
isn't
now
it?
you've added
No.
those slows,
No,
I
lots
must
of
say.
people
I've got another tip
That is
for you. So
very
that
nice.
when you strain the sloes out of
That
the
is nice.
sloe gin, so you've got these sloes and they are totally embedded with gin. If you buy a bottle of the cheapest cooking sherry you can find, sweet, old, horrible cooking sherry, which is very nearly undrinkable, add the sloes to it and bottle it up for a month and then strain it off. And you try that. That transforms that sherry. That's absolutely superb.
Always
then.
tips. Let's get stuck into the jam.
Well, here I go,
The
Rach. Look,
autumnal
this is
feast of jam.
this is how I treat you.
Wow,
I treat you
God,
like one of my own.
buttering
Oh,
our
Richard.
Buttering your bread for you.
bread.
Look, I'm
Buttering
not
the bread.
too much butter. I don't want to adulterate the bread to the extent where we lose our
Oh, quite
Phil-
like this.
Phil normally
full
puts
flavour of
Phil
jam.
normally puts bread on the butter.
Yeah, you'd never guess it, would you?
What are you trying to say?
So what are we going for first then? Let's go for the
But-
I expect
The
you're a
blackberry
flora.
jam.
oh God, no. We have better. Well, we have a mix of things actually. If I ever buy what is utterly butterly or something like that, Sarah says, we're not eating that crap. I don't want to eat that. But so we tend to eat butter, but sometimes, if there's a 2 for 1 or something like that, then
On our sort of talks about the food and farming fortnight, I think it was Ben Gill who said to me that he'd come across a number of kids who thought that margarine comes from milk.
I wouldn't be
This sort of
surprised.
character.
Yeah, no, it's incredible how little some children know about stuff, really. And it's not just the kids in the cities either. It's interesting texture, this damson jam, right?
What have we got here then, Rach? Is this
I thought we were going for the blackberry first.
Is this
Oh, I've got
blackberry, is it?
damson.
What's in
Yeah,
there?
doesn't matter,
the
happy
blackberry and
soft,
apple
whatever
is
you
in that one there.
There seems to be a bit of a labelling issue there.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was running. You have to store jam jars, of course, year on year, and this is my first attempt. And so I ran out of jam jars, and so I had to use an Uncle Ben's stir-fried mix jar.
I've got cases of jam jars up in the loft if you want some jam
Oh,
jars.
not to worry.
Anyway, what is
I've
this?
used- that's blackberry and apple, but you won't find any apple because the apple that I used was the wrong variety of apple. And so when I put it out into the jam, it all floated to the top of the first jar. So the first jar's got all the apples in and the rest have got none. So
Cracking texture there.
Yeah.
That's a nice one.
yeah, you don't quite have to pour it, but it is still a bit
No, it's a good one.
ready.
The damson
superb.
jam, Rach, it's very tasty. The rather kind of, what shall I say, consolidated texture belies a finer flavour.
Quite polite.
Are you saying you want to get to it with the chainsaw, Rich, to get it out the jar? Oh, and the other thing, of
very
course,
good.
the other thing, of course, is that damsons are really difficult to take the stone out of, whereas the plums are easy. So there's no point in having a stone in jam. So it's great with the plums; they just fall out when you cut them in half. But the damsons, you can't do that. So you have to have them in there. And it said in the recipe that they would float to the top.
Right.
Did they, El? They stayed in there, and that's it, I'm afraid.
I remember when Sarah made some damson jam, I said, it's got stones in still. And she just looked at me.
Yes, I know now.
As if say, if you
I
say
know
another
why.
thing, I'll drive this carving knife through your neck.
So which is the
What's that
damson? Is this
That's
damson?
damson with the
that's damson.
stones in. That is Sarah's finest apple and blackberry, how it should
Wow.
Yes, this damson jam does a good job at supporting the jar, doesn't it?
This one, I've tried that
Oh,
one.
yes.
That
Got
plum
this
is
one.
beautiful. Are those your plums, Rach?
No,
from
they're
your
not.
place?
They're not our plums. I don't know where I got the plums
I'm
from.
going to try this.
She's scrumped
Again,
them.
somebody
She's
gave
been
them. Gave us
swiping on
these
been
the
plums.
last
scrumping.
full moon. She was out there. Now this is
This is Sarah's, is it?
that's Sarah's.
These
one,
damsons, were they John Alcock or somebody
No,
else?
they were my dad's. Picked out
Owen's
of the
damsons.
picked out of the loader of the tractor
Now
with
this
a
is
spud box on the front.
That's not very health and safety, is it?
No, it wasn't. No, no,
That's in
absolutely.
the realms of Richard's ladder work.
It is.
Yeah, of course. This time last year, I was in hospital.
You were rich. Passing
All right.
it on to Michael there. Plum jam gone to Michael.
I have to say, the damson and the plum jam, exquisite.
This is good.
This one here, I'm not convinced about.
What is that one?
That's the strain.
This is the blackberry and apple where the blackberry.
Oh, I like that one.
I like that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
really
that's
nice.
right.
I like Sarah's one too.
I was really lucky to bring that this morning because I said, "Can I take some jamming, please, Sarah?" And she said, "No," because everybody would just be sticking their knives in the jam jar and they'd be full of all sorts and drooling everywhere and things like that. I said, no, I just take a bit.
Have you been telling tales about us and our eating habits to your good lady wife? I might not entirely look the part all the time, but I don't dribble in things when I'm told not to.
Oh, that was fabulous. That was a lovely. That is lovely jam. I mean, you know, if you went in a shop and bought a jar of jam, any of those jams, then you'd be chuffed to bits at the fact that you bought it, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and they are. I know the sugar's expensive, but everything else is free, really, isn't it? I mean,
a little bit of
your
effort,
jars are there
but
from year
generally
after year,
speaking.
Well, the great thing
fruit
about
is,
those jams, I know you say the sugar's expensive, but with Borton jams, you've got all those preservatives and added bits that we don't fully understand in them.
Yep.
You know exactly what's gone into those, and they taste better for it to me.
Yeah.
Well, cost-wise, I suppose you pay, 80-90 pence for a jar of jam,
Yeah.
and you can make 6 or 8 jam jars for that.
Right.
So.
Richard's pricked his ears up
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah,
He likes that.
making now.
And the slow gin is just something else.
And the slow gin is sublime. It really is superb. Well, I think that's a wrap, guys.
Yeah, brilliant.
So until next week, it's bye from me.
And it's bye from me. Where's that slow gin, Al?
It's bye from me, right in front of you.
And when I pick myself off the sofa after the gin,
Off the
This
floor.
bar
Bye
will fill
from
with
me.
some more.
Bye-bye.